Well, nothing like nighttime to be working on lawnmowers. So this is a DLT 3000. This was given to me by a friend. The engine blew up on him and he didn't have a use for it after that, so he gave it to me. I put an engine on there that I had put back together because I had gotten it when it was in pieces, and I was going to sell it, but my mower, which is over here, had issues, so I started using this mower instead. And I used this mower for quite a while, and then one day I went to start it after I had turned it off in the middle of mowing, and it wouldn't start again. This mower up to that point had been having issues with the compression release. Basically these engines, the starters do not have enough torque to crank the engine over when it has full compression. So they have a compression release on the intake valve, which relieves some of the compression during the compression stroke when the engine is spinning very slowly. And then once the engine starts, it disengages and it runs normally. When that compression release fails, the starter will crank it until it hits the compression stroke, and then it just stops. And that's what happened to me. It was acting up before. Sometimes I'd be able to get it to crank enough to start, but eventually it wouldn't crank anymore. It would just get to the compression stroke and just stop dead. So this mower has actually been sitting out back for a long time. I actually just used it to make the video on how to get these engines to run with a broken compression release. But it's just about getting springtime here in Florida, so I'm finally going to fix it. And side note, same friend also brought that motorcycle which I am working on. It's just kind of sitting there because I took the carburetors apart. I haven't put them back together yet. So Nick, if you watch this at any point in time, that's what happened with your lawnmower and your motorcycle. They're still here. So anyway, get down to business. I'm not going to show this part, but I'm going to pop this engine off. It's just 4 bolts. Get the pulleys off, a few wires, hoses, stuff like that. And I'll come back once I've thrown it on the bench and I'm ready to actually tear it apart. Ooh, that's heavy. Okay, so on the bench now, just situated. There we go. So, while that's draining, it occurred to me that I forgot to mention a few things. Big thing is, what engine is this? This is a 17.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton Intek engine. Drop that all over the place. So that was the big thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, these engines, the compression release is built into the camshaft, and because these are overhead valve engines, the little bump on the compression release has to be transmitted through the push rod, through the rocker arm, and into the valve. Now it's a common problem for these engines that the valve clearances will loosen up. They're actually supposed to be tightened as part of regular maintenance, but a lot of people don't adjust the valves on these because a lot of people don't maintain their mowers. But you're supposed to adjust the valves on these. A lot of people don't. And so the clearances will loosen up, and then the compression release will stop working because of that. So oftentimes if you've got an engine that'll spin and then just stops at the compression stroke, a quick fix is often to just adjust the valve, the rocker arms, and then that takes care of it. That's not the problem with this engine. I already checked that. Checked it multiple times, adjusted the valves a bunch of times. That is not the problem at all. It is definitely a problem with the actual compression release itself. So we're going to tear this apart and see what's wrong with it. I'm suspecting it is a broken return spring. but we will see. So just one last quick note before I tear this apart. If you think that there's a compression release issue with your engine, the surefire way to know is number one, adjust your valves. Make sure the clearance is right. Then try it. If it doesn't work, obviously you've still got a problem. But if the compression release is working, when you rotate the engine over by hand, during the compression stroke, you'll see this valve open slightly at some point during the compression stroke. This lower one is the intake valve. If it doesn't, then that means you've got a compression release issue down here in the engine itself. That's what's going on with mine. I'm not getting that little tiny bump in the valve, so I've got an issue with the compression release down here. So, enough delay. Tear this apart, and we are going to impact these bolts off because the impact driver does not have enough torque. Should be all of them. This one? Oh, my mistake. This one's covered in grime. There it goes. Oh, and there comes the oil. Uh-oh. Yeah, that's not good. I see some debris in here. Got some metal chunks. That is not good at all, but I think that's identified my problem. Yeah, this is, can you see that? Oh, dropped it. Hold on. Yeah, there's some more chunks in there. Okay, I lost it, but I'm not going to try to find it on this floor. That piece I was showing you, that's actually part of the compression release. So we'll get this out of the way. Oh, there's another piece. This is the return spring for the compression release. Governor appears to be in good shape. So the compression release is actually on the camshaft on these engines, which is right here. So we'll pull this out. It's a bit stuck in there. Okay, the pressure on the exhaust valve from that little trick I did is making it hard to get this out. There it goes. And there goes the push rods and everything too. Get the cam followers. Those look good. And the push rods, we'll grab those in a minute. So here's the camshaft. This is where the compression release normally goes. There's a weight in there, and you can see this is the intake cam lobe, and it's really hard to describe how this works when the when you know it's all broken apart. But so what I'm going to do now, we're going to put a pin in this. I'm going to check in my parts stash and see if we have another one of these camshafts. It needs to be a camshaft with this slot in the end because this is a pressure loop sump. If I don't have another one of these, I can probably get another used one off the internet. But yeah, so that's what's causing us. The compression release didn't just break, it exploded pretty much. Huh, didn't really expect that. Alright, so it has been, however long it's been since I filmed the last part of this video. I think it's been a couple weeks. Anyway, I looked through all my parts piles, and I could not for the life of me find a Briggs & Stratton Intek camshaft that still had the compression release on it. I had lots of camshafts, but they were all missing the compression release, and I believe that's because I kept stealing the compression release parts off of them to fix other mowers. So I ended up ordering a new camshaft from Briggs & Stratton, and afterwards I promptly found this sitting under my desk. Yeah, figures. That's how things usually go. This one does not have the groove in the end of it though, and I'm not too keen on trying to put the groove in the end of it and then use it, so I have that as a spare for something else, but just as well, I guess. Anyway, here is the new camshaft. The part numbers will be in the description, where they always are. Now that I have an intact version, I can actually show you how this works. So this is the compression release mechanism right here. This shaft is shaped like a D, and when it's open like this, the flat is lined up with the lobe. But when it's closed like this, it sticks up just a little bit. So what that does is when it's at really low speed, say a couple hundred RPM or so, when the starter is cranking it, it's going to stay inwards like this. And when, as the lifter is following this lobe, when it hits this shaft, it lifts up ever so slightly, and that provides the compression release it needs for the starter to be able to crank the engine. But as soon as this is spinning fast enough, centrifugal force will take over and this weight will move outwards, and that causes the flat to line up with the rest of the lobe. And that way, instead of bumping up, the lifter will just go right over it and it will run normally. So this is what exploded. It was in a million pieces in the bottom. You see, this is the hole for it right there, and then that clip right there is part of the retaining mechanism for it. First step we're going to do is not actually put the stuff back together. The first thing I got to do is get all this gasket material off of the mating surface. I've already done it for the sump, but I have not done the crankcase yet. Now, I'm sure it's recommended to use like a razor blade or a scraper or something for this, but if I do that, then honestly we're going to be here all freaking day. So we're going to do it the easy way. And I'm sure people are going to have a problem with this, but the bottom line is it does not make a difference. And now we'll just clean all the crap out of it. This is going to take a while. I'm not going to make you sit through it. Okay, the engine's all clean. Time to start putting things together. We'll start with these new lifters. These came with the camshaft. Just going to coat them in some assembly lube. You can also use motor oil in place of assembly lube, which is what I usually do, but it gets all over the place because motor oil is liquid and it flows. Assembly lube is more like a grease, and so that's one of the benefits of assembly lube is that I can just stuff the lifter up in there and it will stay put. Now I'll put the camshaft in, and this is gotta be one of the easiest engines ever to time. Just find the mark. Okay, like I was saying, just find the timing mark. There's the little divot there, and there's a little divot there. You just line them up and pop it in. And there you go, it's all timed. There's really only one way it can go in there, so you don't have to worry about it being on a certain stroke or anything, because you'll get it right no matter what. And then, get some assembly lube on that. There's the governor, and maybe it'll cooperate with us. Okay. Now for the main shaft. And a little bit for the camshaft. Thing's not going to want to stay until we get the sump on. So now we're going to do the hard part, and the reason this is the hard part is that governor is going to try to move when I want to do this. And if you look in there, that is the oil pump drive, and that has to line up with the slot on the camshaft. So I'm going to try to get it as close as possible to the same orientation before I go to put it on. I think that's pretty close. Put some assembly lube in the bearing as well. So we'll just slide that on. And just tap it on. I'll try adjusting the oil pump drive a little bit. Try it again. There's also some dowel pins that this has to line up with, so everything just kind of has to end up perfect. Okay, looks like the dowel pin wasn't lined up. There it goes. Alright. Okay, now we're going to put the sump bolts in. Now, these bolts originally had Loctite on them, but as you can see, it's all gone now. These bolts have probably been removed like 4 times or something, so all Loctite is gone. Now, if your bolts have only been out once, this is the first time you're doing this, you probably won't have to add Loctite, but yeah, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and add some blue Loctite to these, just to make sure they never come out. The bolts aren't different at all. It's just for some reason, sometimes a certain bolt won't cooperate with the hole. Not sure why that is. It just is. So if it doesn't want to thread in nicely, try it in a different one. I'll just run them down real quick. Okay, now if you go online, you can find one of these. This is a Briggs & Stratton check chart. It's got various specifications for all different engines by the series. And for this one, we want the sump bolt torque. And for this engine, it is 180 inch-pounds, since it is a 3100 series engine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to torque them down. I'm going to torque it in 2 stages. I'm going to first go to 100 inch-pounds, then I'll do the final torque to 180, and I'm going to torque them in a crisscross pattern so that it gets tightened down evenly. Okay, now we'll put the push rods in. First, these little buttons go on top of the valve stems. You want to make sure you do not lose them, which is very easy to do when you're doing this kind of work. So we're just going to lubricate the ends of the push rod and go ahead and put those in. Now, one is aluminum and one is steel, and you don't want to get them mixed up. So how do you know which one is which? Well, the aluminum one is for the intake valve, the steel one is for the exhaust valve. So the aluminum one goes on the bottom, exhaust on the top, and the way you know which end goes in which is you just look for this little bit of wear on here. This is from the plastic push rod guide. So just drop that in there. Do the exhaust push rod. Okay, now we're going to want to, I'm going to put a little bit more assembly lube on there. And now we'll need to adjust the valves. So the center screw is the set screw, and the outer nut adjusts your valve clearance. That one's probably pushing down. Rotate the engine. Okay, now it's pushing on that one, so that means that this one can be adjusted now. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and adjust the valves. Now, when I move it, you can see the exhaust valve is moving. That means the intake valve is going to have slack in it, and that is the point where we want to adjust the valve clearance. So, you're going to need a feeler gauge for this, and consult the spec chart again, and it calls for 0.003 to 0.005 inches on the intake valve for this particular engine, so I'm going to go right in the middle with 0.004. So slide this right in here and then turn the outer nut to adjust the clearance. You don't want it too tight, you want to be able to just barely move that in there. So now I'm going to take a wrench, hold the outer shell, and tighten up the set screw. And I'll double check that. Yep, that's pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and do the exhaust valve. To do the exhaust valve, we'll continue to rotate it. Now that the intake valve is compressed, the exhaust rocker is slack. So now we can adjust that. There is a different spec for the exhaust valve on these engines. It is, let's see, 0.005 to 0.007, so I think I'm going to go 0.006 right in the middle again. Let me just find this. There it is, 0.006. Slide that in there. Alright, now I'll tighten down the set screw. slightly on the tight side, but it's still within spec. So I'm going to call that good. I'm just going to rotate the engine, make sure everything is moving properly. Just pop this valve cover back on now. Alright, all that's left is the spark plug, but we'll put that on when it's back on the mower. Now we're just, other than that, we're ready to put it back on the mower.